Hello and welcome to another edition of Conversations with Common Sense Media. My name is Holly Grosshans. I'm Senior Counsel for Tech Policy at Common Sense Media. Today we're talking about a topic that is really important to my heart because I was a former Internet Crimes Against Children prosecutor for many, many years. And we just released a new report that talks about teens and explicit deepfakes in the age of AI. And today, this conversation that we're having is with Dr. Supreet Mann, who is the lead researcher on the report, and also Jon Talley, who's a special agent in charge of the Internet Crimes Against Children unit at the New Mexico Attorney General's office. Jon was instrumental in bringing Meta to trial and holding them accountable for the harms that take place online to children in New Mexico earlier this year. This topic may make families and educators and community members really uncomfortable, but it is a really important conversation to have. And so I'm really grateful that we have Jon and Dr. Supreet Mann here with us today. Supreet, I'd like to start with you. Give us the high-level stats on your new report. What stood out and how different are the findings compared to the research you conducted 4 years ago?
Thanks so much for having me, Holly. So what we found in our latest research is that nearly half of teens say that they've already seen AI-generated sexual content. So 44% of young people have been exposed to this content. And for a lot of them, their exposure to this content is unintentional or accidental. They're not seeking this content out. They're being fed this content either algorithmically or through friends who are sharing the content. And what we also found was that 1 in 4 of those who have seen this content say that they've seen it depicting themselves or someone that they know. So not only are they being exposed to this content, but this content is really hitting home in terms of its personal exposure. And teens aren't just deepfake victims. Many are also creators of the content and maybe creating this content without fully understanding the implications and the ramifications that it might have for other young people. So 1 in 5 has made AI sexual content or knows someone who has, and 1/4 of them have shared or know someone who has shared this content. And when we look at this, the findings from this report compared to our last report that was published in early 2023, what we're really finding is that the space of AI generation has exploded. When we did this research area a few years ago, we were not talking about AI-generated sexual content. What we were talking about then was really more traditional forms of online pornography. And we found young people who were going to sites like OnlyFans, other types of sites. And certainly they were also finding this content on social media and from friends, things like that.
Jon, I'd like to turn to you. We've talked to medical professionals who said that tech advances so quickly that the medical community and families are often far behind in knowing about what's happening in their teens' world. So what are you encountering when it comes to teens and deepfakes?
That is actually true. Tech advances so fast. It is kind of hard to stay in front of it and understand all of the trends that are going on. What we're seeing is that the deepfakes are starting to really kind of hit the scene for us. And these kids are posting what they feel are innocent photos of themselves or their friends living their everyday daily life. And there are bad actors and predators that are taking those photos and using AI to create sexualized images of these children.
Supreet, sorry, going back to you, you had talked a little bit about the AI and AI generation, which is a little bit different from this report and the 2023 report. Did you find anything about how teenagers are considering deepfakes different than like other explicit content that they're seeing online, particularly in the harms that they associate with the deepfakes?
Yeah, definitely. So we asked young people about their perception of AI-generated sexual content. And what we found was that for a lot of young people, they are nervous about AI-generated sexual content. About 2/3 of young people think that this type of content is distorting how their peers think about bodies, relationships, intimacy. It's really impacting some of those foundational elements of the young person romantic experience and that sort of interpersonal experience. It's changing how they're thinking about really foundational things like consent and what it means to be in a relationship. And of course, it's changing their trust in images and videos. So again, what we really wanted to focus on was the unique role of AI generated content and how young people think about that. And we did ask young people about whether they were nervous about being depicted in this content. About 2/3 of young people said that they were scared. They had some fear about being depicted. And of those who said that they were fearful, a huge chunk of them indicated that they have changed some of their online behaviors because of this. So made their public profiles private, taken images down, were more careful about what they post. So not only is it impacting how they are viewing their peers, what they think their peers are doing, or how they're interacting with one another, but it's also impacting their own behaviors online in a way that, in a place that's coming from fear.
Did you ask them any questions about creating AI generated content without consent?
We did. We asked young people whether they thought creating this type of content should be illegal. And the majority of young people who have seen AI generated sexual content indicated that it should be illegal. 82% of those young people said so. Now, we do hold this sort of tension between young people who recognize that this content is a problem, that it strips agency, and that it should be illegal, with those young people who think that it's not as bad as real pornography because people are not getting hurt in sort of the same way. So about 1/4 of young people said that AI generated nudes are less harmful than real porn because no one gets hurt in the process. So I think there's this real tension for young people about recognizing that they're not being able to be in control of their image, but also viewing it as something that may not have the same sort of impact as pornography in the more traditional sense. I think that's really where education needs to come in and helping young people understand the implications of the content that they're posting and how, even despite this being a real image, it can have real consequences.
Yeah, definitely. Jon, that stat that 23% of these teens believe that AI nudes are less harmful than real pornography because, in quote, no one gets hurt. That's really interesting. What kind of real life harms are you seeing from these deepfakes?
So we actually see quite a few harms, and knowing that 23% feel that there is no harm, I think a lot of it has to do with people being desensitized because you are exposed to these images and type of content on a daily basis on these social platforms. We see these victims face emotional trauma. We've seen, kids unfortunately commit suicide over some of this stuff. So the harms are very real. To say that they're not harmed in some way or is what we refer to as a victimless crime is just not true. These kids are harmed.
Right. That's why this conversation is so important here today. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much. Jon, I know much of your work at the New Mexico Attorney General's office has really been on adult perpetrators and their crimes committed against children online. But is what these teens are doing in creating these deepfakes potentially criminal?
So like you said, most of our work has been focused on adult perpetrators and protecting kids online. The children that create these deepfake images could potentially face criminal consequences. What we want, though, is for parents, educators, law enforcement to have the conversations with these kids and let them know that there are potential consequences they could face. And just have the conversation with them, do everything we can to protect kids on both sides, whether it's kids that are victims of these images or kids that may be creating these types of images, understanding why this stuff is wrong, how it harms people, and eventually what consequences they could face for this type of stuff.
We've talked a lot about individual responsibility and the victims and the stats from the research. From a criminal or civil liability standpoint, Jon, where do these companies fit in, considering that they create these powerful AI tools or apps that make creating these images so fast and so easy for someone?
Sure. So the companies that create these social platforms and these tools that are widely available to anybody have a tremendous responsibility. Having these tools can be a really good thing, but understanding the dangers that come with them needs to be explained as well. And the tech companies have, in my view, they have a huge responsibility in making sure that their platforms are safe and secure for kids that want to visit these sites, that want to use these tools, and then understanding that when they are used in ways that are not their intended purpose, to make sure that they're being reported to law enforcement and that we have an opportunity to investigate this stuff and work together to basically help keep everybody safe. A jury found Meta liable for this type of stuff. And it's not just Meta, it's any social or internet service provider that allows people to access these platforms and use these devices to help keep kids safe, just as much as it's a parental responsibility, a law enforcement responsibility. Those companies have what I feel is an even higher responsibility because it is their tool that they created.
At Common Sense Media, part of our work has involved developing legislation to support strong enforcement of laws to protect kids from harmful tech at both the state and the federal levels. Can you explain how your work really works in tandem with ours?
What we want to do every day is look at kind of the trends that are being exposed or being used online and do what we can is in those realms to help keep kids safe. The Attorney General is working with legislators to help strengthen New Mexico laws where, like you said earlier, tech evolves so rapidly, the laws are always farther behind. So having advocates, having legislators, having, our elected officials kind of work to strengthen that stuff and try to get in front of it as much as possible, to help keep kids safe online, whether it's dealing with AI and deepfakes or any of the other trends that are emerging. All of our roads intersect and it kind of share the same common goal.
That's really, really interesting, and we'd love to work with you further on how we can better support you there. What advice, John, do you have for children and family when it comes to images online and how to protect, your family from these images?
Sure. So that's a great question. We actually get asked that quite a bit. And the first bit of advice I always give, especially when talking to kids, is have a trusted adult that you can talk to. We've all been, a teenager, a young child before. And when something like this happens, I never had to experience this as a kid, but when some sort of catastrophe happens, as a kid, you feel like it's the end of the world. And we want kids to know it's not the end of the world. There are people out there that want to protect you, that want to keep you safe and hold these bad actors accountable. So the first thing I tell them is have a trusted adult, whether it's a parent, an aunt or an uncle, a teacher, whoever that trusted adult is, talk to them. And then after that, with that person, report that stuff to law enforcement. Here in New Mexico, and I can speak for the rest of the country, we all have dedicated ICAC task forces that's our job, is to help protect these kids, whether it actually is legit child pornography or AI created sexual images, help them try to get these images removed and work through the process together, and then hold these bad actors accountable so that they know their life's not over. We will get through this, and that they're not alone in this, that it's not their fault and there are people there to help them.
So if your image is used, there's recourse, there's ways to work with NCMEC and with law enforcement like yourself to try to get it taken down. Is that right?
Absolutely, yes.
Great. Supreet, do you have anything to add here about how to talk to kids about this, and what kind of conversations should parents be having with their kids to kind of prevent this activity from happening? And, any advice you have here for parents?
Yeah, one of the things in the study that we asked young people about was we asked them whether they had talked to a trusted adult about this type of content, and only about 1 in 5 said that they have ever talked to a trusted adult. But we also asked them if they wanted to talk to a trusted adult, and about a third of young people said they'd like to talk to a parent or a trusted adult, but they just don't know how to start the conversation. And I thought something that was really interesting was that for the younger kids in our study, the kids that were 13 and 14, more than half indicated that they would like to talk to a parent about disturbing sexual content that they see online. That number dropped for the older kids in our study. So the 15 to 17-year-olds, that number dropped to about a third. So I think what that really tells us is that there might be this opportunity here to reach kids early and to have these conversations before, hopefully, they've encountered this content, as opposed to being reactive after they have.
And John, I'm sure you see in your work with like sexual exploitation cases that that's actually a tool that like groomers and these perpetrators use against kids, saying like, you can't tell anyone, like they'll hate you, they'll disown you, right? So like having that conversation is really, really important.
Absolutely. And they're difficult conversations to have, but they are conversations that have to be had. And like was just mentioned, getting there early and educating the kids and adults on how to have these conversations and why they're important can help kind of combat some of the manipulation that these bad actors use online.
Well, thank you both. I think we've gotten really, really deep here. And I'd love to end on hopefully a positive note with this conversation, because I think that this is, what we've talked about is like having these important conversations with our kids in order to protect them. So I'd love to hear on a positive tone, if either of you have a message that you could send out to teens.
Yeah, one of the things that came up repeatedly in our focus groups was this feeling of isolation and fear. And I think what I would like to highlight, my message for teens would be, you are not alone in this, and this is not your responsibility to carry alone. So there are people who want to help guide you through this process, who want to provide you with resources. I think it's just about finding those people, and they exist. They are parents, they are educators, they are law enforcement. They are all there to try to help and support. And we do have some wonderful conversation starters on the website as well that we released along with the report that are really meant to get the conversation started for both parents and families.
That's very true. The internet and social media can be an awesome, great tool to use. You just have to use it responsibly. And just have these conversations. That is the biggest thing. It's a great tool, and just understand, like Dr. Mann said, you are not alone. If a bad actor gets a hold of your images and uses AI to generate something unfavorable, it's not your fault. But have these conversations, talk about this type of stuff, and just know there are people that are willing to help you and want to help you.
Other than having all these really important conversations, do either of you have any other tips for parents that you could share with us?
I think we as parents have a tendency to get into our own heads a little bit and tend to think that this is like a really uncomfortable, awkward sort of conversation. But these are real conversations that your young people are having with their friends. They're having them in other places, and they're having them in largely kind of like unregulated spaces. We also asked young people about whether they would be comfortable turning to trusted adults, and almost a fifth of young people said that they would not be comfortable talking to anybody about disturbing sexual content that they see online. 13% said that they would be comfortable speaking to a teacher, and 10% said they'd be comfortable talking to AI. So I think what this really highlights is almost the same percentage said that they'd be comfortable talking to a teacher as said they would be comfortable talking to AI. That is not what we want. We don't want young people to want to go to AI to talk about problems that they're having in AI spaces and, how this content is being used in really unregulated ways. So I know it feels very kind of like pounding the drum to just continue to say like, talk. But I think it's so true and so important that the conversations start early, much earlier than parents realize, because whether or not we want to admit it, our kids are being exposed, and they're being exposed whether they're seeking it out or not.
The other thing too that I would say is for parents to educate themselves. Get on the apps that your kids are on, research this stuff, understand how to use the safety protocols that are embedded in the settings, understand whether the video game that they're playing on their phone, if it has a direct messaging feature, am I able to shut that off? Can I monitor? Can I have my child's account linked to my account, or different things like that? Understand, get hands-on time with these tools, and use them yourself so that you understand what your kids are actually using on a daily basis.
Thank you so much to both of you. This has been such a thoughtful conversation, and we really appreciate your advice about how to talk to our kids and have these important conversations with them so that we can keep them safe in this quickly changing environment. Parents out there, if you would like more information about this research or any of our work at Common Sense Media and those conversation starters that Dr. Mann just mentioned, please visit commonsensemedia.org. And thank you so much.